I've always believed that where you come from shapes who you become, and my journey started before I was even born. In the late 1970s, my parents left West Germany seeking better opportunities. With dreams of a fresh start, they immigrated to Canada, arriving in Montreal while my mother was pregnant with me. My father, a trained goldsmith, found work quickly, and they began building a life, not just for themselves but for the family they were starting. Growing up, I often heard about the sacrifices they made. Thanks to my father's dedication, we lived comfortably, and by the time my brother Ethan was born, he had opened his own jewelry shop in the West End, his hard work paying off. We settled in Beaconsfield, enjoying a good life, but I never forgot how much effort it took to get there. My name is Leah Mercer, though most people call me Leo. My parents left West Germany in 1979, before reunification, and built their lives in Montreal, where I was born. My father established himself as a goldsmith, and a few years later, my brother arrived. Life flourished. My father's jewelry store provided well for us, allowing a comfortable lifestyle. Today, my parents spend winters in Florida, enjoying their retirement. As for me, I was an average student, more interested in hockey and girls than school. My limited French made finding work in Quebec tough, so I took a customer service job with a Vancouver-based building materials company. A year later, I transferred to Vancouver, and ironically, my French skills helped me land the job. The moment I arrived, I fell in love with the city, its modern energy, beaches, and mountains. I quickly made friends through work and hockey, joining a beer league team. Since I could skate backward, I ended up as a first-line defenseman. It kept me fit and was a lot of fun. At the end of the season, I met Sophie Langley at a team barbecue. Like me, she was from Montreal. We hit it off, exchanged numbers, and soon started dating. Sophie was beautiful, with short dark brown hair and a slim figure. Within a year, I proposed. We discussed our future, and eventually, she accepted. We had been physically involved for months, and though Sophie was more traditional, our relationship worked. She was a lab technician, running medical tests for private clinics. She took pride in her job and got along well with her co-workers, all women except her boss, Nathan Porter. As we planned for the future, we crunched the numbers. If I secured a sales job, our combined income would be close to $90,000, potentially enough to buy a house. Sophie agreed to marry me on one condition: I had to get the job. A few months later, I did, and we set a wedding date. My parents were thrilled, while hers were more cautious, though they agreed to attend. We had a small wedding in a suburban church and took a brief honeymoon to Victoria and Seattle before settling into our rented apartment. I worked hard in sales, hitting my targets, while Sophie continued at the lab with her steady hours. Despite our different schedules, life felt stable. We saved enough to buy a townhouse in the suburbs and celebrated our third anniversary shortly after moving in. Talk of starting a family came up, but Sophie wanted to wait until we were financially secure, though she never defined what that meant. Like many couples, our physical relationship changed. In the early years, we were intimate 4 or 5 times a week, but by our third anniversary, that had dropped to once or twice. When I finally brought it up, Sophie became defensive, blaming work exhaustion. I missed our old spark, but I accepted that couples don't always align in their needs. Overall, we seemed happy and on track. Then something unexpected happened. I became close friends with our next-door neighbor, Amber Dawson, after she and her husband, Derek, moved in. Despite our bond, there was nothing romantic between us. Amber was a stay-at-home mom with 2 kids, while Derek worked as a car salesman. She had a sharp wit, a no-nonsense attitude, and a bold sense of humor that I appreciated. Amber, taller than Sophie, had reddish blonde hair and striking blue eyes. She often joked that Derek did the right thing by marrying her after she got pregnant. Their kids, Madeline, a charming 10-year-old, and Caleb, an easygoing 7-year-old, were polite and fun to be around. Derek was 6 feet tall with curly red hair, a ruddy complexion, and a flashy sense of style. Bright suits, a fake Rolex, and a gold ring. He seemed to think this was the perfect car salesman look. His upbeat, always-on personality could be entertaining or grating, depending on the day. I found him irritating, though Sophie didn't seem to mind him. Amber, on the other hand, was a great conversationalist, and over time, we became good friends. I also enjoyed spending time with her kids. Maddie was polite and charming, sure to be a heartbreaker one day, while Caleb was full of energy and always well-mannered. Sophie, however, kept her distance, which made me wonder if she was hesitant about having kids. If we did start a family, I hoped our children would be as great as Maddie and Caleb. Then everything changed. Last spring, after 6 years of marriage, and just when we were close to saving enough for a house, I was blindsided. My company was sold, and our branch was shut down, leaving me unemployed. The shock hit hard, but what hit even harder was Sophie's reaction. Instead of support, I saw disappointment, even frustration, as if I had personally failed her. The weight of it all crushed me. I started job hunting immediately, but opportunities in my field were scarce. Each morning, Sophie left for work with a quick kiss, while I spent my days searching for jobs, growing more discouraged with every rejection. 2 frustrating weeks passed, and I was feeling pretty low when Amber showed up one morning. "Hey, handsome, got any more coffee?" she asked, her usual playful energy intact. She often called me that, even in front of Derek and Sophie, and no one seemed to mind. I invited her in, and over coffee, I told her about losing my job. Unlike Sophie, who had been distant, Amber was immediately engaged, brainstorming ways to help. "What was your best subject in school?" she asked. "English, especially writing," I replied. That sparked an idea. She had a friend, Victoria Hayes, who worked from home writing manuals and often turned down projects because demand was so high. Maybe she could point me in the right direction. I thanked Amber, and within minutes, she was dialing Victoria. When she handed me the phone, I caught Victoria at the perfect time. I offered to call back, but she was on a break and happy to chat. She explained how she had been in a similar position, unemployed and searching for work, when she stumbled across a job writing manuals for an import-export company. "The translations from China were hilariously bad," Victoria said. "They needed someone to clean them up." She mentioned that the company also needed a French translator to avoid outsourcing expensive and low-quality work. It sounded like a great fit. She gave me the agency's name and her contact there, Mr. Chun, and I asked if I could mention her. She agreed. As I poured Amber another cup of coffee, I smiled. "Amber, you and Victoria might have just saved my life." "Thank you." "No need," she said, grinning. "Nice to see you perk up again. You looked pretty down earlier." "Yeah, well, Sophie isn't thrilled about me being out of work. It's thrown off all our plans." "Leo, you didn't get fired." "This happens all the time," Amber said. "Derek's come home frustrated before, but I give him a pep talk, and well, a little fun, and he's back at it the next day," she laughed. "Sounds like a solid strategy," I said, envious of how Amber handled things when Sophie had been so critical. I called Mr. Chun and mentioned Victoria's name. To my relief, he was interested and asked if I could meet him that afternoon. I was so relieved I nearly hugged Amber. "You don't know how good this feels, Amber," I said. "Glad to help," she replied, flashing a grin before heading home. By 11 a.m., I was in the shower, then dressed in a clean shirt, navy blazer, and tan slacks. I didn't change again until after lunch to avoid spills. At 2 p.m., I met Mr. Chun. He was an Asian man in his mid-50s, dressed in a rumpled suit, which made me wonder if he was looking for cheap labor. But Victoria had spoken highly of him, so I gave him a chance. He explained that his company imported machines from China and Thailand, ranging from plastics manufacturing to woodworking. The translations they received were so poor that even he, fluent in Chinese, struggled to understand them. He needed clear English instructions for his customers and French translations to expand sales in Quebec. The cost of translation services wasn't yielding the accuracy he needed, especially since they didn't understand the machinery. "I get it," I said. "Let's do a trial run. If I can handle the work, we can agree on a fair rate." "That works for me," he said. "If you can do this, it would be a huge help to my business, and I'll make sure it's worth your while." "Great. Want me to do a sample here, or take it home?" He chuckled. "My computer's ancient. It's better if you use yours and bring it back when it's done." He handed me a thin folder and led me into the warehouse, where stacks of crates and machines filled the space. "This is the machine the instructions are for. Look it over and ask if you have questions," he said. I compared the diagrams in the manual to the actual machine. They matched, but I asked, "How accurate are these drawings?" "Usually good, but sometimes they send old ones with new machines. It's a real problem. I can see that, I said. These seem fine. I'll get started and call if I hit any snags. He nodded approvingly. Smart approach. Leaving his office, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: hope. The job wasn't in my field, but it seemed interesting, and if it worked out, I'd be happier than before. Sophie, however, wasn't convinced. What do you know about machinery? How can you make money from this? She asked. I know someone who's doing it successfully. Plus, I'd love to work from home. Oh, great. So you'll sit around all day while I work in the lab? Why would you think that? Working from home means no commute, less stress, lower costs. Show me you can actually make money, Leo. I have my doubts. If it were that easy, everyone would be doing it. I have a mechanical mind, solid writing skills, and I'm bilingual. That's rare here. I think I've got a real shot. How much is this guy paying you? Nothing yet. It's a free trial to prove I can do the job. Sophie scoffed. Great. So you're working for free now? Her doubt stung, but I pushed forward. I had a plan, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. Once I know what my time is worth, I'll set a price, I said confidently. Great. You're working for free on a job you don't even know if you can do. Fantastic, Sophie muttered before stomping off to the kitchen. Her reaction drained some of my enthusiasm, but I was determined to prove myself. After dinner, I went straight to our home office and got to work. The English version of the manual was so poorly translated it was nearly incomprehensible. Taking a deep breath, I started rewriting. By midnight, after pushing through a headache and a stiff neck, I had managed to complete only a page and a half out of 6. Progress was slow, but I was starting to find my rhythm. Exhausted, I took a couple of Tylenol, crawled into bed, and fell asleep, satisfied with my effort. The next morning, Sophie was already dressed, eating her usual yogurt and granola. As expected, she hadn't made coffee. She never drank it. I greeted her, and she mumbled something in return. After a quick peck on my cheek, she left for work at 7:10 a.m. I headed to my office, reviewed last night's work, fixed a few small mistakes, and got back to it. I was on my second or third cup of coffee when I heard Amber's familiar voice. You who? It's me again, handsome, she called from the back door, amusement in her voice. Come on in, Amber. Grab a coffee. I'm in my office, I called back. She stepped inside and smirked. Well, aren't you looking put together? She teased, eyeing my t-shirt and boxers. Just because I haven't shaved or dressed doesn't mean I'm a slob, I joked. She laughed. What are you working on? Page 3 of 6, translating instructions for the Heavenly Blossom Model 356K, 14 thickness planer, I said, over-exaggerating the seriousness. Amber burst out laughing. Where do they come up with these ridiculous names? No clue, I said, but this is harder than I expected. I spent 5 hours last night just getting through a page and a half. It's picking up now, though. Should finish the English by noon, then start on the French. And you're doing this for free? She asked, suddenly sounding like Sophie. Yeah, Sophie wasn't impressed either, I admitted. But it's the results that matter. I'll know soon if this is worth pursuing. Good luck, Leo. I think you're going to surprise her, Amber said. Always direct but encouraging. After a pause, she asked, Can I ask you something personal? Sure, go ahead. Do you think you and Sophie are really happy? I hesitated, staring into my coffee. That's a damn good question, Amber. I left it at that. By 11:30 a.m., I had finished the English version and called Mr. Chun, letting him know I'd have the French version done that afternoon. He was pleased and told me to come by any time. That small validation gave me a boost of confidence. After a quick lunch and some help from my dictionary, I wrapped up the French translation by 2:30 p.m., double-checked both versions, and found no errors. I changed into business clothes and headed to Mr. Chin's office. He read through the English version, nodding occasionally as he made a few minor notes. Finally, he looked up. Excellent, Mr. Leo. I'll send this for verification. If your French is as good as your English, we have a deal. Then he asked how many hours I had spent on the work. About 11, I said. He nodded. I'll have a check for $660 ready tomorrow. I blinked. Wait, I thought this was a free trial? I don't take advantage of good work, he said. I believe we can do good business together. I was stunned. He even advised me to incorporate my business to avoid tax issues and protect myself from liability. I thanked him and asked him to let me know if there were any issues with my translation. As I was about to leave, he surprised me again. Don't you want your next assignment? Of course. I stammered, eager to keep going. He smiled. I'm confident your French will be just as good as your English. Thanks to Miss Victoria for introducing you. He handed me another manual, and we walked to the back to review the machine. After confirming the drawings were accurate, we shook hands, and I left with a spring in my step. At $60 an hour, a full-time schedule would gross over $120,000 a year. Seeing the stack of manuals on his desk, I felt a rush of optimism. That evening, when I told Sophie, her mood noticeably improved at the mention of my pay rate. Maybe we should celebrate tonight, she suggested. For the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful about our future, and I couldn't wait to tell Amber, who had set this all in motion. The next morning, I dove into my new assignment. With some experience now, the work went faster. I finished the English version by 1 p.m. and the French before dinner. 8 hours total. The following morning, I called Mr. Chun. He was pleased with my efficiency and eager for more. Can we set up a system where I don't have to drive in daily? I asked. I could work on a week's worth at a time and email the finished translations. He agreed and suggested direct deposit for payments, which I appreciated, though I'd need to set up a business account first. We discussed drafting a contract, and I told him I'd consult my business advisor. As I reviewed 5 new manuals, I found one minor omission, but otherwise, the work seemed straightforward. By the end of the week, I had a new career and a business name, Precise Word Services. I filed for a GST license, opened a business account, printed business cards, and designed a letterhead. On my lawyer's advice, I drafted a letter of understanding for Mr. Chun, outlining our agreement and my hourly rate. I also invested in a color laser printer as a business expense. By Thursday, I had completed 5 manuals, returned them, and picked up 6 more. I wondered just how many machines Mr. Chun had, as I logged 46 hours that week, earning nearly $4,000. By the end of the week, I was on track to double my earnings. I was working nonstop in my home office, barely seeing Sophie except for brief conversations at dinner. At first, she remained skeptical of my new job, but over time, her curiosity grew. So, how often do you get paid? She asked one evening. I get paid per job, I explained. Since I'm a contractor, I handle my own taxes and expenses. A few nights later, she casually mentioned, "Can you spare $1,000? Things have been tight since you lost your job." I hesitated for a moment, even though my business was already bringing in about $3,000 a week. "Sure," I said, transferring the money from my business account to our joint checking. Sophie seemed surprised but pleased. It felt good to contribute again, even though I hadn't been out of work long. To get a sense of where my business was heading, I met with Mr. Chun. He assured me that more complex machines were on the way, meaning steady work for the foreseeable future. Relieved, I knew I could finally relax a little. One warm afternoon, Amber dropped by as usual, greeting me with a playful smirk. "Hey, handsome, where have you been hiding? Come on over, and I'll tell you," I called back. As she settled in, I couldn't help but share my news with a hint of pride. "You're now speaking to the president of Precise Word Services Incorporated, Liam R. Mercer." Amber laughed. "Oh, right, the big boss now?" "That's right," I grinned. She shook her head, smiling. "Well, it's good to see you happy. It's been a while." I nodded. "Yeah, feels like a weight's been lifted. I can move forward again." Her expression grew more curious. "How does Sophie feel about all this?" I hesitated before admitting, she doesn't really know. Amber frowned. "What do you mean?" "I haven't told her how well the business is doing," I said. "Oh," she said simply, watching me carefully. After a pause, I reminded her, "Remember when you asked if Sophie and I were really happy?" She nodded. "Yeah." I exhaled slowly. I'm not so sure anymore. I haven't lied to her, but I haven't told her everything either. "Why not?" Amber pressed. I shrugged. "I don't know. I just have this feeling something's off." After a thoughtful pause, I posed a question. If you were in my place, making good money, would you tell Derek everything? Amber considered it, then answered carefully. That's tough. We rely on Derek's commissions, and sometimes it's hard. I'd hate to think he was holding out on me. Yeah, I murmured. That's what's bothering me. I'm holding out on Sophie, and I don't even know why. Amber's response was blunt. That's easy. You don't trust her. I looked at her, searching for confirmation. You think? She nodded without hesitation. I know. Something's wrong between you two, and I'm pretty sure it's not you. Curious, I asked. Why do you say that? Because I know you, Leo. You're straightforward, no nonsense. But I've seen the way Sophie acts when she thinks no one's watching. She treats you like she married beneath her. I let that sink in before murmuring, her parents? Amber frowned. What about them? They don't think much of me, I admitted. Maybe it's rubbing off on her. Amber scoffed. Are they royalty or something? I shook my head. No, her dad's a city employee, and her mom works part-time at a market. Definitely not royalty. Then they should be grateful she married someone who treats her well, Amber snapped. You deserve better. I sighed, considering her words. Maybe they had bigger expectations for her. Amber leaned back. So what now? I don't know, I admitted. I still love her, but it feels like she's given up on me. I hope I'm wrong. Amber's voice softened. I hope so too, Leo. Though there were no obvious signs of infidelity, a lingering unease settled over me. A few weeks later, Sophie mentioned working overtime due to a reorganization at the lab. We seemed to be drifting further apart, and it made me uneasy. I was nearing 28, and we hadn't even started a family. I wondered if we ever would. Trying to reconnect, I cut back on night work and started contributing $800 to $1,000 a week to our joint account, explaining that the business was stable. Financially, things were great, but emotionally, nothing changed. Sophie remained distant. We were intimate maybe once or twice a week, and no amount of effort on my part seemed to make a difference. Meanwhile, my business with Mr. Chun thrived. He regularly praised my work, and as I became more efficient, I found time for myself. Occasionally, I'd take a break for a long lunch or a beer at the local bar. After our intense conversation weeks earlier, Amber and I didn't see much of each other until I started inviting her over for morning coffee. It became our time to talk openly without fear of being overheard. One morning, as we sipped our coffee, Amber asked, "How's Sophie?" I sighed. Same. Distant. Do you think you two will make it? I want to keep trying, I admitted. But I'm not sure. She gave me a knowing look. Both of you need to try for it to work. Yeah, I muttered. I know. Then she hesitated, as if debating whether to speak. Finally, she said, Leo, she's cheating on you. I froze. Amber would never joke about something like that. You know this? I asked quietly. She nodded. Yeah, I know. With who? My voice shook. Her boss. Porter. I felt cold inside. How long? Not long with him, but he's not the first. My stomach turned. What? Who else? Amber hesitated, then sighed. I found out Derek slept with her a few months ago. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Holy crap. Anyone else? I don't know, she admitted. But one's enough, isn't it? Yeah, I whispered. More than enough. Amber's face hardened. I'm going to kick Derek out. I'm done with him. I barely heard her. My mind was spinning. My marriage was already hanging by a thread. Now, it was shattered. He's done this before, Amber said, her voice firm. And if I let it slide, he'll do it again. I'm looking for a job before I leave him. I won't let my kids live in poverty. I groaned. Jesus, Amber. Can this get any worse? She gave me a knowing look. I remember you asking me the same thing when you lost your job, and Sophie gave you hell for it. What a mess, I muttered, rubbing my face in frustration. Yeah, she agreed. But at least now you know the truth. I exhaled slowly. Well, I guess I'll be rethinking my financial plans. No way am I giving Sophie anything after this. She can go live with her boss. Can't blame you, Amber said. Just don't do anything that'll land you in jail. I need you for my morning coffee. She smirked. trying to lighten the mood. I attempted a grin. Maybe we should both kick them out and move in together. She raised an eyebrow. You're forgetting something, Leo. The kids? No, I'm not, I said. If they don't come with us, the deal's off. Amber let out a soft laugh, but I saw the tears welling in her eyes. We both needed some kind of release, and for a moment, we let ourselves share a genuine laugh. It felt good to have someone to talk to, someone who understood. We decided to set aside our spouse problems for the day. I had work to finish, and I needed time to figure out how to cope with living under the same roof as Sophie until I made my next move. Surprisingly, I felt more detached than angry, more disappointed than anything. I even wondered how many others there had been besides Derek and her boss. That night, I acted as if nothing had changed, though sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept spinning with what to do next. One thing was clear. I needed proof. Not because I doubted Amber, but because I wanted to see it for myself. The next morning, Sophie casually mentioned she had to work late again. I knew exactly what that meant. I called Amber, borrowed her car, and parked near the clinic, staking out the parking lot. Sure enough, a little after 6, Sophie walked out with a tall man in a suit. They got into a sleek Mercedes, and I followed them to a hotel. I watched them check in, each carrying a small overnight bag. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay calm. I snapped several pictures, solid proof of what I already knew. Later, I returned Amber's car and told her what I saw. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Cool down first. Think before you do anything stupid." We agreed to talk more the next day. That morning, Amber and I sat down to discuss our next steps before her kids got home. I was angry, but the shock had faded, leaving me with a numb certainty. The marriage was over. How did you even find out? I asked Amber. Gossip, she admitted. Sophie's affair with her boss got noticed at work, and word spread through mutual acquaintances. Someone who knew we were neighbors told me. I shook my head. So, a lot of people knew before I did. Yeah, Amber sighed. And the thing with Derek? That was a nosy neighbor who noticed Sophie sneaking him into your house when you were away. I clenched my jaw. I guess she fell for his whole big shot salesman act. Probably, Amber said. Speaking of which, is Porter married? I nodded. Yeah, but I don't know much about his wife. Amber grabbed my phone book, flipped through a few pages, and dialed a number. Hello, is this Mrs. Richard Porter? She asked sweetly. After a brief pause, she said, Oh, I'm sorry. Wrong number. Then she hung up and grinned at me. Well? I asked. Married. No kids, Amber confirmed. I let out a low whistle. No wonder I can never fool you. She smirked. You never stood a chance. We sat quietly for a moment before Amber suddenly said, We should check something out at City Hall? I frowned. What are you thinking? A title search, she explained. Let's see who owns the clinic property. You might find some leverage. I considered it, then shrugged. Derek right. I've got time. 10 minutes and $10 later, we had our answer. The property title for the clinic was under Mrs. Eleanor Porter's name, the same address as Nathan Porter's home. Amber smirked. Looks like Mrs. Porter holds all the power here. I chuckled. So, Loverboy's wife owns the building. Maybe he's just the manager. Exactly. And I'll bet Sophie doesn't know that, Amber said. If he's playing her, she's in for a rude awakening when I dump her. Ain't that a shame? Amber said with a satisfied grin. We left City Hall and grabbed lunch. Being with Amber lifted my spirits, even in the middle of all this chaos. We didn't talk about our personal problems until we got back to my place. So, what's next? I asked. Did you take the pictures like I suggested? Amber asked. Yeah, I said, pulling out my camera and connecting it to my computer. We scrolled through the images. The shots at the hotel desk and elevator left no room for doubt. You could hire a private investigator, Amber said, but honestly, it's not worth it. Whether you divorce her for infidelity or irreconcilable differences, the outcome will be the same. Save your money, she added, and brace for the worst. I exhaled. I never thought it would come to this. Amber's voice was quiet. No one ever does. She sighed. I didn't think Derek would cheat on me either. But he did, more than once. I'm just stuck for now. I need a job before I can leave him. I have to provide for the kids. I looked at her thoughtfully. I've been thinking about something, I said cautiously. Hear me out before you say no. I'll try, she said, watching me carefully. The other day, I joked about us moving in together with the kids, I started. But the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. My income will pass $125,000 this year. I could buy a 4-bedroom house in the same school district. You and the kids could move in as tenants until you find a job you like. No strings attached. Amber blinked, clearly caught off guard. That's a sweet offer, Leo, but it wouldn't be fair to you. Why not? She hesitated. What about your personal life? Your future? You don't want to stay single forever, do you? No, I admitted. But this doesn't have to be permanent. If you find a job and want to move out, you can. At least you'd have a stable place with the kids in the meantime. She looked away for a moment, deep in thought. I could tell she wasn't dismissing the idea outright. Maybe, just maybe, we were both standing at a crossroads, searching for a way forward. Leo, you're a great guy, but what if I move out? What will you do with a big house then? Amber asked, concern in her voice. I shrugged. Maybe you won't want to move out, I said, almost cringing as I heard myself say it. Amber's eyes widened. Are you saying you have feelings for me? I hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, sorry, but yeah. Oh, Leo, don't do this to me, she said, clearly conflicted. Do what? I asked with a small, uncertain smile. Don't mess with my head, she said, exasperated. This is too much. I haven't even kicked Derek out yet, and now you're coming on to me? It's not fair. I know, I admitted. But what they did to us wasn't fair either. This isn't about fairness, she shot back. It's about what we both know. If you don't feel the same way, just say so, I replied, my voice calm but steady. Amber was quiet for a long moment. Tears welled in her eyes as she stood up, pacing through the kitchen and living room, shaking her head, mumbling to herself. I took it as a good sign. She hadn't said no. She wasn't angry. She was just uncertain. Damn you, Leo, she finally muttered, walking toward me. How could you? Then, without another word, she wrapped her arms around me and pulled me into a tight embrace. When she finally let go, I stood up and hugged her back. Can I take that as a yes? I asked, half joking. She sniffled, wiping her eyes but smiling. Of course. How could I say no to you? No strings, Amber, I reassured her. If it works, great. If not, no pressure. She met my gaze, her expression softening. Then I'll make sure it works, she whispered before breaking down into tears again. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Maybe we could both come out of this stronger, together. Following Ryan Fletcher's advice, I hired a family law firm and retained Hannah Caldwell, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer. I decided not to hide my new income. If necessary, I'd disclose everything, but my goal was to negotiate a fair split and avoid alimony. Hannah suggested a calculated bluff. Offer Sophie an even split of assets, no alimony, and hope she'd accept before realizing how successful my business had become. I agreed. I'll serve her the papers soon, I said. Hannah prepared the documents, and the following week passed uneventfully. Sophie had 2 more overtime shifts, but I didn't confront her yet. Finally, Hannah confirmed everything was ready, so I called Amber. It's D-Day, I said. I've got the papers. Now I just need to figure out how to deliver them. Want me to come over? She offered. Yeah, coffee's ready. We chatted over coffee, and I laid out my plan. Tonight, I'll confront Sophie, tell her I know about Porter, and hand her the divorce papers. If she resists, I'll show her the photos. If she still fights it, I'll remind her that Mrs. Porter doesn't know about the affair. That should push her to agree. And if she refuses? Amber asked. Then I move out and we fight it out legally. Have you packed a bag? Not yet, but I will before she gets home. I smirked. No overtime tonight. Amber kissed me lightly on the cheek and hugged me. Good luck. Let me know how it goes. Once my situation was settled, we'd deal with Derek, which would be Mercer. Amber planned to stay put for now, knowing Derek wouldn't take things quietly. I even loaned her money for Hannah's retainer, so we could tackle everything together. That evening, after our usual silent dinner routine, I looked at Sophie and said, "We need to talk." She tensed immediately, probably expecting another, "We're not close anymore" conversation. But this time was different. "Enough talk, Sophie. I know about your affair with Nathan Porter. Since you don't respect me or our marriage, I'm divorcing you. Here are the papers." I was calm, surprisingly so. Her shocked expression was priceless. She gasped for air, coughing as she struggled to respond. "How?" she finally managed to choke out. "You weren't discreet," I said. "Plenty of people knew, including your coworkers." Her face crumpled. "Oh God. I'm sorry, Leo. I wish I could say something, but I'm so sorry." I shrugged, unfazed. "I'm proposing a 50-50th split. We sell the townhouse and split the equity, or you buy me out. Either way, I won't be living here anymore." Sophie nodded slowly. "That's fair," she whispered, though she still couldn't look at me. I studied her carefully. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" She hesitated. I expected an excuse, but instead, she spoke the truth. "I thought Nathan could give me a better life. He's successful. I believed he could offer more than you." I clenched my jaw but held back. Hannah had warned me not to overplay my hand. So instead, I simply said, "I hope you find happiness. Clearly, you weren't happy with me." "It wasn't you, Leo," she murmured. "You were always good to me. I just wanted more." "An upgrade," I muttered. "Maybe," she admitted. "Nathan is wealthy. I thought he'd provide a good life after his divorce." I feigned surprise. "He's married?" Sophie nodded, shame creeping into her expression. "I'm not proud of it. We cheated, but we were good together." I exhaled. "I'm moving out, Sophie. I'll stay in a motel until I find a place. If you agree to the settlement, the papers are here. You might want to consult a lawyer." She shook her head. "No, I won't fight it. I hurt you, and I'm to blame. 50-50 is fair. I'll sign them tonight." I returned from the bedroom with my bag. She seemed surprised I was already packed, but said nothing. Instead, she quietly handed me the signed divorce papers. I skimmed them, then tucked them into my pocket. "I'll come by tomorrow for the rest of my things and my computer files." Sophie nodded. "Of course. This is still your house, Leo." For the first time that night, she looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw real regret in her eyes. Her sadness almost made me reconsider. "Derek most." I kissed her cheek gently and whispered, "Goodbye, Sophie." Then I walked out. I had won my freedom, but I had also lost what I had once hoped for. It felt like a hollow victory, but I knew there was no going back. After everything Sophie had done, staying with her wasn't an option. The next morning, I called Hannah to update her. She was pleased. "No drama, just a quiet end to your marriage," she noted. "Yeah," I sighed. "Guess that's the best outcome." After dropping off the signed papers, I headed back to the house. But as I walked through the door, I realized something. It no longer felt like home. I packed my clothes and personal items, leaving everything else behind. Sophie could keep the photos. We'd split the furniture later. Sitting in my office one last time, I reflected on the end of an 8-year chapter of my life. I didn't feel great about it, but I knew I had to move on. Thinking of Amber lifted my spirits. I started transferring my files to my new laptop, a process that would take most of the morning. I informed Mr. Chun that I needed a week off for personal matters. He understood, assuring me I could catch up later. Working from the motel wasn't ideal, but it was manageable. The hardest part? I missed my morning coffee with Amber. But until she served Derek with divorce papers, we had to be careful. On Friday, we met at an espresso shack and parked in a quiet lot to talk. "How are you holding up?" I asked. Amber exhaled. "Okay, but I'm not looking forward to telling Derek. I'll do it tomorrow after the kids leave for school. It's the only time we're alone." "Makes sense," I nodded. "Hannah advised me not to force him out if he has nowhere else to stay," she added. "But I won't be sharing a bed with him any longer than necessary." "And the kids?" I asked. "When will you tell them?" She sighed. "Tomorrow, once he's gone. They'll still see him, but it's going to hurt." I nodded. knowing she wouldn't deny Derek visitation, no matter what he'd done. After a long pause, Amber added, "They asked about you, you know?" I blinked. "Really?" She nodded. "They like you a lot. Having you around will help them adjust. You're more like a dad than anyone else." "Thanks," I said, touched. "I'm looking forward to that. And to being with you." Amber reached for my hand. "You said you wanted to talk. What's on your mind?" I hesitated, then said, "I want you to come with me to see a house I'm thinking of buying. I'd like your opinion, since you'll be living there too." Her eyes widened slightly, but then she smiled. "Sure. I could use the distraction." At 11 a.m., we met the real estate agent. I walked Amber through the house, pointing out the rooms, potential fixes, and extra space. It wasn't a mansion, but it was big enough, with private bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, and a basement that could be a playroom for the kids. Amber looked around, nodding. "I like it. Needs some work, but nothing we can't handle. Plenty of space for the kids. If you're looking for my approval, you've got it," she added. I grinned. "Great. Let's make an offer and see what happens. It's been sitting on the market for 4 months. We might get a deal." The agent was thrilled, probably due to the slow market. I made a low offer, expecting a counter. The empty house suggested the owners might be juggling 2 mortgages. Afterward, Amber offered to buy lunch. We stopped at a sushi bar, where she joked, "Derek would never eat here." I laughed. "Guess that's another plus." For the first time in days, Amber looked like herself again. I knew the feeling wouldn't last. She still had to face Derek, but for now, I was just glad to see her smile. The weekend at the motel was lonely. Sophie was out of my life, but even though we hadn't been close for a while, she had still been someone to talk to. Now, I was alone, and I couldn't see Amber either. On Saturday, I took a long walk by the river to clear my head. The rest of the weekend, I buried myself in work to stay distracted. By Sunday afternoon, I was caught up, and when I updated Mr. Chen on Monday, he was pleased. He even hinted at a special project he wanted me to take on. We set a Tuesday meeting to discuss it. I also called Amber. "Hannah just told me. All the divorce paperwork is ready," she said. I could hear the tension in her voice. "You okay?" She exhaled. "I'm nervous about telling Derek. I need a strategy." I hesitated. "Wouldn't it be better if someone else served him the papers?" Amber was firm. "No way. If someone else serves him, he'll go ballistic. I need to do this myself." "You sure?" "Yeah," she said. "Maybe if I'm the one to tell him, he'll finally understand how much he's hurt me and the kids." "Amber," I started. "I'm not changing my mind, Leo. I let him off the hook before, and it just let him walk all over me again. Not this time." I sighed. "I wish I could be there to help." "I know," she said softly, "but I have to do this alone. Tomorrow morning. I probably won't sleep tonight, but I can't let the kids see this. It has to be just us." She was strong, stronger than she realized. "Good luck," I told her. Tuesday morning, I followed my usual routine, grabbed my laptop, and treated myself to a full breakfast at the motel restaurant. I chuckled to myself, realizing I was still being frugal, even though I was making more money than ever. After breakfast, I waited for rush hour to pass before heading to Mr. Chen's office. But no matter how much I tried to focus on work, my mind kept drifting back to Amber and Derek. I knew she could handle it, but that didn't stop me from worrying. At my meeting with Mr. Chen, he caught me off guard with an enormous project, translating tractor, backhoe, and forklift manuals from China. "The scope is way bigger than anything I've done before," I admitted. "I don't know if I can handle it alone. I'm not even an expert on this kind of equipment." "Mr. Leo, you are very good at what you do," he assured me. "Can you find people to help? I'll pay $100 an hour. This is a big job, and I trust you to do it right." His confidence in me was overwhelming. I hesitated, then nodded. "Let me review one of the manuals first. If I think I can make it work, I'll take it on." "Thank you, Mr. J," he said, grateful. I left his office with a forklift manual in hand, excited but apprehensive. As I drove, a chill ran through me. I hadn't heard from Amber yet. What if things had gone south with Derek? I grabbed my phone but hesitated. What if he was still there? Instead, I pulled up to Amber's townhouse at 10:30 a.m. and saw that Derek's car was gone. Relieved, I called her. Hello? Amber answered softly. Amber, it's me. Are you okay? I asked. Yeah, I'm okay, she said, her voice tired. Can I come in? I'm right outside your door, she replied, as if checking one last time that Derek was really gone. A moment later, I walked in. Amber was sitting at the kitchen table, eyes red from crying, exhaustion written all over her face. I sat beside her, grabbing a cup of coffee. Tell me everything, she sighed, shaking her head. He completely broke down, Leo, crying, begging on his knees for another chance. I winced. Damn. It was so pathetic. It made me cry, too, she admitted. Did he agree to leave? Yeah. At first, he denied everything, but when I mentioned Sophie and why you're divorcing her, he looked like he was going to be sick. Then I brought up Olivia Carr, what that girl at school said to Maddie, and that's when he lost it. Jesus, I muttered. Amber exhaled deeply. I feel like I wasted 10 years of my life, Leo. 10 years I can't get back. I reached across the table, taking her hands in mine. There's one big difference between your 10 years and my 7, I said. Oh yeah? She asked, skeptical. Madeline and Caleb. Tears welled up in her eyes, and I squeezed her hands gently. You'll get through this, Amber, I said softly. She finally broke down, and I held her as she released everything she'd been holding in. She was one of the strongest people I knew, but even the strongest need someone to lean on. After a few moments, she pulled away and wiped her eyes. I had to do this myself, Leo. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I wish I could have been there for you. No, she said firmly. This was my fight, and I won. I smiled. Well, I guess we're both starting new lives now. She studied me carefully. Are you having second thoughts about us? Of course not, I said. But it's your choice, Amber. Whatever happens, it's up to you. She shook her head, laughing softly. That's a cop-out, Leo. You tell me you have feelings for me, and then leave it all to me? What kind of man are you? I grinned, and she couldn't help but smile back. Then she wrapped her arms around my neck and kissed me deeply. I don't think we'll be apart anytime soon, she whispered. As expected, the house offer was countered, but it wasn't far from what I was willing to pay. After a quick negotiation, I signed the deal. I now owned a 4-bedroom house in a great neighborhood. Looking back, I was almost embarrassed by how easily I moved on from Sophie. But the truth was, I never really loved her. Not the way my parents love each other. Real love felt different. Since signing the divorce papers, I hadn't seen Sophie. The final decree would be issued in February. Word had it that she and Nathanby left town with little more than his Mercedes. His soon-to-be ex-wife took over the lab, and it seemed Sophie had lost her dreams twice. Derek, on the other hand, was still working at the Chevy dealership, but had changed. His divorce from Amber would be final in March. He saw the kids weekly, but had gone quiet, a far cry from the overconfident salesman I once knew. Amber, at my suggestion, chose not to demand alimony or child support. We didn't see the point in kicking him while he was down. He brought this on himself. Amber and I were a different story. She took no crap from anyone, including me. I'd never understand why Derek cheated on her. He deserved the dumbest man alive award. I loved Amber like crazy and would fight to keep her. When she told me she loved me, I wouldn't argue. I'd just be grateful. And let's just say, I was extra motivated to stay in shape. Amber had a way of keeping me on my toes. The 4th bedroom didn't stay a bedroom for long. After Derek left, Amber explained everything to the kids. Maddie, being older and already suspicious, took it better than Caleb. He was quiet for a few days, but kids adjust fast. When Amber told them about the new house, big backyard, same school, it eased their concerns. And when she mentioned I'd be living there too, Caleb cheered, and Maddie nodded in approval. They feel the same way about you as you do about them, Amber told me later. We moved in after Halloween. I took the kids trick-or-treating in their old neighborhood, where they ran into familiar faces. No sign of Derek, probably something he couldn't handle. I hired movers to make the transition smooth. Sophie and I split the furniture, avoiding petty arguments. Derek, now crashing at a friend's place, had no need for furniture, so Amber took care of his share. The only thing I had to buy? A TV for the kids and a few dining room items. With Christmas approaching, I planned to spoil Amber and the kids, but carefully. Amber hated extravagance, but she knew how much they meant to me. We built a new life together, one that felt real and right. And, let's just say, our relationship was much more passionate than what I was used to. No complaints there. To keep things discreet, I set up my home office in the spare bedroom, buffering hours from the kids' rooms. We also discovered the benefits of working from home. Sometimes, happy hour started at noon. As for my career, I hired a multilingual engineer to help with Mr. Chin's massive project. We secured a long-term contract to produce manuals in English, French, and Spanish as Mr. Chin expanded into the U.S. market. The business was booming, and Amber, now my personal assistant, handled negotiations, scheduling, and finances. She wasn't just my partner in life. She was my partner in business too. And to top it all off, we were getting married in Hawaii over spring break, with both our families joining us. This time, it was for keeps.